Welcome to the Flying the FlightGear P-51D series of tutorials. This video will cover the startup procedure. First, I would like to take you for a quick overview of the cockpit controls that will be used during the startup procedure. Starting on the left-hand side of the cockpit, we see the throttle controls. These include mixture, prop pitch, and the throttle setting itself. Moving further to the right, we see the engine controls right here. During the startup procedure, you will be using the primer switch, the starter switch, and the fuel booster switch. Further to the right, we see the ignition switch, which you will be using during the startup procedure, along with the gun sight power switch, which you will also be using in order to protect the delicate gyroscope in the gun sight. Also in the gun sight, we have the power switch right here and the reticle selection switch right there. Further to the right, we have the main switch panel, which has the generator disconnect and battery disconnect switches, which you will also be using. And the other thing of interest on the right-hand side of the panel is the oil pressure gauge, which is right here. We will be checking that right after the startup completes to make sure that there's proper oil pressure to the engine. For this tutorial, I will be walking directly through the standard startup checklist, which comes with the aircraft as a standard part of the installation. The first thing we want to do, well, we'll walk through this list one item at a time. One of the things I would like to point out is that, for example, if you're not sure where something is, and you want to check its position, like the gun sight gyro switch, you can click on this little question mark and it'll actually show you where the device is. So let's walk through this. The first step is to set the prop to full increase. So we push this lever all the way up. We make sure the ignition switch is off because we're going to be having a crew pull the prop through. We don't want to kill anybody. We set the battery disconnect to off, which it already is. It comes up that way. And the mixture to idle cutoff. So we do that with the mixture over here. So we put it all the way there. So next we have the prop pulled through. That's not simulated yet. And so we assume that the crew has gone out here and they pulled the prop through a few times. And the next step is we need to start preparing it for the actual startup. So we turn on the fuel cutoff. We connect the battery so that we can actually turn the engine over. We turn on the main gun sight power switch, the gun sight gyro, and I always like to flip on the main gyro reticle so that I can check to make sure that the gun sight is fully powered up. And the next step is to put the throttle in the startup position, which is 1 inch approximately of travel. And you can see that right up here it tells you when you're in the correct position to start the engine. The next thing we do is we actually pull the prop through with the starter, 6 full turns, and we can do that by engaging the starter, and that's pulled the prop through. The next step is to turn the ignition switch on, and we turn on the fuel boost. And notice when we did that our fuel pressure increased. Here, let me flip it off so you can see what the fuel pressure did. Okay, so we have about 10, 12 pounds of fuel pressure at this point. Then the next set of steps kind of have to happen in sequence, and they happen fairly quickly. But what we do is we prime the engine, we start the end, we engage the starter, and it'll fire because it's been primed, and at that point we need to increase the mixture, turn on the mixture, and the engine will start running. So this is all going to happen fairly quickly, and I'm going to do that so you can see what happens with the mixture control right here during the process. So what I'll do is I'll engage the primer, then the starter, and then bring the mixture up. Now, one other thing to note here is that before I started this whole thing happening, I engaged the brakes so that the aircraft wouldn't roll on the engine was being started. Next thing we need to do is we need to bring the RPM up to about 1500, and then check the fuel pressure gauge to make sure that we've got pretty close to 50 pounds of pressure, which we do. And then the last thing on the checkoff list is the generator disconnect needs to be turned on so that our battery doesn't lose its charge. And that basically concludes the startup procedure.